saying thank you all again for joining us for a MassMEDIC webinar. We are absolutely thrilled to have you at our virtual town hall. I'm Rachel Robinson, our Vice President, and it's just been such a pleasure to have these times with you every month and every week before that for the last 18 months. So thanks again. We do have a great full program today. So before we kick things off with content, just a few quick reminders. Please keep yourself on mute unless you have questions. In the Q&A is the best option. There's a chat box at the bottom, not the personal chat, but the Q&A chat is always a great way to get things across. We do absolutely encourage questions for this session, especially. I know our moderator and panelists are going to talk a little bit more about it, but they're hoping this will be a very open forum discussion. So we absolutely encourage your feedback. We couldn't do these programs without our sponsors. So I do want to take a moment to say, thank you to all the sponsors who've been supporting this program throughout the year. Thank you to all our speakers as well, but especially to Greenlight Guru, one of our series sponsors who's been very great in promoting these events and giving us a lot of wonderful opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Brian Johnson to get us started.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody, or wherever you're at. I hope you're having a good morning or good evening, or if you're watching this later. Hello, I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the president of MassMEDIC. I'm really excited to join you today. Rachel mentioned Greenlight Guru, who is our series sponsor, but we have a ton of support for this series. We have Toxicon, NPR, Mullings Group, Zymedica, Boston Analytical, Hathi and Company supported one, R&Q Solutions, and QAD. We're really humbled by all your help over the course of this year. You guys help make sure that this kind of program happens. We're going to check in with our man in DC, Anthony DeMeo from NL Strategies today. We're going to talk about the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. This is the massive 240-page bill that just passed the Senate this week in somewhat overwhelming fashion. There's a lot in here, Anthony. I hope you can take us through it, and then I'll ask you a couple questions after a brief presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to you to drive this ship for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've actually got a couple of slides that should help if I can just get them up here. Hold on one second. I think, as you say, it's sort of a huge thing, so I don't want to try to pretend like we can get through all of it, but it has some interesting and I think important provisions for our audience. And as you say, a rare show of bipartisanship in the Senate. It is called the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. It passed on Tuesday. It's at least $250 billion. It's being billed as the generational and transformative investment in R&D. And it's really been Chuck Schumer's baby for, since before elevating to majority leader. It was first introduced last year in a different iteration in a bipartisan way with Todd Young from Indiana. And then after Biden took office, it was sort of, some changes were made to accommodate some of the president's priorities, and it was reintroduced with those two sponsors. Also introduced in the House, called the Endless Frontier Act in both. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of flip the script where the Senate has now passed in a bipartisan way under regular order a giant bill, and has pushed it to the House to take up and make law. As I said, it kind of had a tortured experience in the Senate, as open rules as a regular order bills might often experience. I think there were 600 amendments offered over its lifespan. Not all of them taken up, certainly, but many were to try to secure the support needed to break that 60 vote threshold. And ultimately it did. As you can see, 19 Republicans voted in favor, and the only Democrat or Democrat light who voted against it is Bernie Sanders. So that includes both of the Massachusetts senators voting in support. Ed Markey's fingerprints indeed are all over the bill. He sits on 2 committees with significant jurisdiction over the various titles in the bill. The Commerce Committee sort of being the largest, but also the Foreign Relations Committee had a lot of input here too. So you'll probably hear from him in the coming days as he's doing media about different priorities that he's been pushing a long time, both on foreign relations in terms of surrounding China through partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and holding them to account for human rights violations and things. And also, what he's always been on from, day one in the House and maybe even the State House, investing in research and development, because that's really the driver in Massachusetts. So, what's in it? We'll try to keep it brief. And Brian, and if I'm missing anything, please, let me know. But it's, as you say, a massive bill. The first title spends a significant amount of money on semiconductor investment. There's a huge national security concern that was sort of laid bare during the pandemic, as much of our supply chain concerns have been highlighted, that there's just not enough capacity in the United States to compete in semiconductor manufacturing. So there's over $50 billion for that. And there's also huge concern over Huawei being the sole provider of 5G in the 21st century, and what that means for our our cybersecurity. And so there's another $1.5 billion to try to spur the private sector to in the United States to develop a competing product. That's the ORAN 5. The big meaty part of the bill is the one that was introduced last year, as I said, known as the Endless Frontier Act. And this is where all that aforementioned tech investment comes from. It's it incorporates a reauthorization of the National Science Foundation, but also expands the agency significantly. So it creates a new director of technology and innovation, which is specifically to support R&D and in a few technology focus areas. Among them, which might be interesting here, already called out in the legislation, AI and machine learning, which is growing, has growing applications in life sciences, clinical trials, and otherwise. Robotics and advanced manufacturing, of course, something we're all involved in, and it actually specifically calls out biotech and medtech as early focus areas for the new directorate. So great stuff considering we're talking about $100 billion. There's also, just as you said, hundreds of pages of policy provisions in there, not the least of which is securing research. That's sort of one of the top priorities is, if we're going to spend all this money, we also got to make sure that we're keeping it safe, the research product. So there's going to be a lot of, I think, movement on how we and in our community, researchers are securing what we come up with in clinical trials and in the lab and otherwise. There's a few other bills that were kind of rolled into this one and achieved final passage. These are the ones that kind of take on China directly. The Strategic Competition Act came out of the Foreign Relations Committee and really surrounds China with strengthening alliances, or in the region, and takes them on directly with some sanctions, increased sanctions for human rights abuses, and other sort of key hot button issues we've been talking about a lot. Securing America's Future Act. This is a purely cybersecurity play out of DHS. Kind of one of the interesting things is it prohibits TikTok from being downloaded on government phones. So see where we're going on this stuff. But I think interesting for our group, and something Brian and I have been talking about with members of Congress and some of our members at MassMEDIC, it included in the Buy America provision of Securing America's Future is language to mandate DHS, HHS, and the VA engage in some long-term domestic production contracts with PPE manufacturers. And the goal there is to create some long-term stability and make it so, a member like ours down in Fall River can have some confidence that the buyer is going to be there in 2 years or more. I think the minimum is 2 years, so hopefully 5 or 10. And then, of course, there's provisions that mandate that DHS and HHS and VA can then transfer PPE that they own under these contracts to other agencies or hospitals or others who need it in the event of a pandemic, like what we've experienced over the past year. So that's sort of the high-level overview. I think what's interesting now is what happens next. As I said, this is sort of a flipped script. We've seen over the years a lot of bills pass the House in a bipartisan way and go to the Senate to die. But where this was Chuck Schumer's baby and he was committed to doing it with bipartisan support, open it up to amendments so that everybody could get something that they wanted and had prioritized, eventually ended up with 68 senators voting for it. The pressure is now on the House. And Speaker Pelosi hasn't made any commitments, but there is similar legislation already being considered, both in Foreign Affairs and the House Science Committee. Of course, Ro Khanna and his Republican co-lead of the Endless Frontier bill are pushing hard. We'll see how it all plays out, but right now they're projecting confidence that this is going to get done before the August recess. So, it's moving. I think if there's concern or questions or tweaks that need to be made, it can be done, but the engagement's got to be, now. But I think, net, it's a very positive development. It's a lot of dough, as Majority Leader Schumer said. It's a generational investment and something that's we're sort of behind on. So the number had to be big, and like I said, the president supports it. So it's going to be hard to do nothing if you're Nancy Pelosi and other members of leadership. And of course, we've already seen posturing and attacks from the Chinese government and promises of retaliation and retribution. So that's always nice. We'll see how that shakes out. But typically, these things will play out, and then we'll see what, if anything, they want to how if any way they want to respond. But there's always ways to sort of smooth these things over, I think. But where this is sort of a unique one, it's going to give some people pause. So we'll have to see how the House takes it up in the next couple of weeks. I had one more topic to address, but I thought we could pause here, Brian, in case I've missed anything or you want to dive into any part.
I think you did a great job, Anthony. And I think if you wouldn't mind hanging out and answering some questions in the chat or Q&A, if people have them. I mean, this seems like a very positive bill for Massachusetts. Just our delegation, anybody come out in support of this? Besides, on the House side.
Yeah, I think we haven't seen a lot of analysis from the House side yet, but of course we do have our own. There's a whole trade title on this, with ways that we're going to engage in stronger export controls and such. So we'll definitely hear from Chairman Neal, and I think we're going to hear a lot of posturing, but right now sort of bipartisan support. So I think part of the big driver here is to President Biden talked about this in his address to the joint session of Congress, spreading out tech investment so that parts of the country that don't have these sort of concentrated hubs of economic activity surrounding high tech, like New York and the Research Triangle, and certainly Silicon Valley, can get in on it. And sort of there's a national security component to that, where you sort of spread out investment, and it's a little bit safer, but also bringing new and better jobs to sort of parts of the country that might have been left behind. So I think that these tech hubs are not necessarily a great boon for Massachusetts because they're already sort of there. But I do think that particularly on policy, there's a lot of really positive developments here for us. And it's not exclusively biotech. It's not even really the top line, number one issue in the bill. Life sciences, medtech, whatever. But the fact that it's in there, I think, is positive for a community like the ecosystem in Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're a little pressed for time here, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I wonder how much this changes the dialogue on the giant infrastructure spending bill that seems now to be almost thrown back into sort of the kitchen, so to speak. You're taking $250 billion, and there was substantial tech investment moving over to this bill. Do you think to me that would mean that probably the president will get forcefully behind this bill to get a couple wins under his belt? But what do you think in terms of the infrastructure bill that has been talked about?
I think there's no question that this is something that the president's going to call a win and spike the football. So, anytime you can get, the Congress to pass something in a bipartisan way, it's something that he promised on the campaign trail he'd be able to do, and sort of everybody laughed at him. So, this would be a big win. But, as you say, infrastructure is a harder, it's proving to be a harder, more moving target. And, it was only 19 Republicans that voted for it out of 50. So there's a lot of budget hawks out there that are, displeased with watching $250 billion walk out the door. And they're the same ones that didn't want even $700 billion for a transportation bill. So I do think it puts a little bit of a tighter squeeze on that. But that's something that can be done via reconciliation if we end up getting, Manchin's buy-in on a package, on an infrastructure package that works for him. We're not there yet. The president's still negotiating with that bipartisan group of 20. But I tend to think that's the direction this is going. You can notch a big bipartisan bill, call that a success, spend a considerable amount of money, roll out some really good talking points, and then move on to a real more horizontal brick, what you call a bridge and roads infrastructure package with a more limited scope than perhaps what we originally had rolled out.
Great. Thanks so much for jumping on with us and getting us.
And I just wanted to highlight this in case you haven't seen it. It's worth checking out the White House report on supply chain security that came out this week. So there's a lot of supply chain talk in Washington right now. This is the result of his executive order that demanded a 100-day review of supply chain security for various things. But the one I think that we're probably most interested in is pharmaceutical and API, which was carried out by HHS, and not exclusive to that, but it's respirators and everything else that we ran into serious problems with. It's a year ago now, maybe even more. But I know that there are members of MassMEDIC who are doing everything they can to get vents to hospitals all over the country, and certainly in Massachusetts at the height of this. The report actually lays out a good roadmap for engaging with the administration, with HHS, and with the FDA on what they need to do better and how they need to sort of rethink the critical supply chain. So I would look into that, and happy to, maybe I'll just find it and put it in the chat. How's that?
That's great. That's great. Thanks so much. That Anthony, you're always a font of knowledge. He'll hang out a little bit in the chat if you guys have questions, but that's all for DC and from our end.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Anthony. So we're going to jump really quickly into our meat of our topic today. And I honestly think what Anthony was just talking about tees it up really well when it comes to a generational investment, right? We are doing things now and having these discussions because they're not only relevant now, they're relevant for the next generations to come. So with that, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to turn it over to Steph Norvisis of Delve, who I am so thrilled to be having spearhead this discussion. Wonderful organization. If you don't know Delve, you got to check them out. Good buddies of mine. And Steph, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead this conversation.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, but when you talk, your video is actually not coming through.
I know. I'm having glitchy problems, so I don't necessarily care that you see my face as much as hear my voice. So just give me a signal if my voice is getting glitchy too. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about sustainability and medical devices. This was designed as a 45-minute conversation with 15 minutes for Q&A, so we're going to pivot a little bit. The reason why we're bringing up the topic of sustainability is probably very obvious, but it's a topic that is complex, multifaceted, interconnected, global, urgent, and nonlinear. And sustainability has really moved from a nice to have initiative in organizations to a strategic imperative. And many organizations are setting up serious goals at the highest levels of the organization for sustainability. We're seeing it from manufacturers, suppliers, customers, Wall Street, governments, and many other organizations. And all of these are coming to bear on us and all of our businesses. This is really seen no longer as an option for business, but as good business in and of itself. And to be fair, we're all learning as we go. So this is a sizable shift in business as we know it, and perhaps even a harbinger of the next business revolution along with technology. So we've lined up a great group of people to share their experiences. They all come from different places, different points in the learning curve, and they're here to share their experiences with us and hopefully inspire some conversations today and later on. So today we're joined by Lisa Brady, the VP of Global Sustainability at Insulet, Souvik Paul, the CEO of Ori, formerly CathBuddy, and Dave Carey, the General Manager of Marketing at Pristine Surgical. Just so you know, I'm joined by Paul Barnes of Delve. He's going to be monitoring the chat and keeping an eye on questions that are timely, that he'll interject, and then helping us navigate Q&A when we get to that. So as this is such a huge topic, we're really going to focus on, well, we had planned to focus on 3 topics: the definition of sustainability, metrics of sustainability, and how to build a team and what kinds of skills you need. So we'll see how far we get. Any one of these topics could be several days long. So we'll just sort of get started by asking everybody to introduce themselves. So you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, your business, and your role and relationship to sustainability in your organization. And let's start with you, Lisa.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak here today. It's really great to be among such a wonderful group of leaders here at MassMEDIC and various companies. My name is Lisa Brady. I am joining here from Insulet Corporation. I have been with Insulet for about 8 months now. And just to tell you a little bit about Insulet, we are an innovative medical device company. We are dedicated to simplifying life for people with diabetes and other conditions through our Omnipod product platform. Our Omnipod insulin management system is a unique alternative to traditional insulin delivery methods with insulin pump therapy. And our product is both tubeless and waterproof as an advanced medical device. So we're very proud of that and proud of the passionate employees who are very customer centric and very interested in ensuring that we are providing wonderful outcomes for those that are managing their lives with diabetes. My current role is, as Stephanie mentioned, I'm the Vice President for Global Sustainability, our Chief Sustainability Officer. It is a brand new position at Insulet and a brand new function that I am creating. I'll stop there to give time for other folks to give introductions, and then we can get into more detail.
Great. Let's pass it on to Sovik.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited for the conversation. I'm the CEO and founder of Ori, formerly CathBuddy. We are developing a reusable urinary intermittent catheter system for people who have urinary retention or have neurogenic bladder. And you know, as far as sustainability goes for our organization, we're still an extremely early stage company, which means that we have almost the luxury of being able to define sustainability and implement it almost right away in terms of our ongoing product development. And it's, you know, it's funny because Stephanie said that this has been a nonlinear process across industries, and it's been that way for us too. You know, it might sound crazy, but when we first came up with the idea of a reusable catheter system, sustainability wasn't really the focus or the motivating factor behind that. For me personally, I'm trained as an industrial designer. I have a personal connection to a family member who uses catheters. So we were much more focused on user experience and improving quality of life. But then, you know, the more we spoke to end users and the more we spoke to investors, the more we realized that sustainability had to be core to our focus and our ongoing product development. So we almost kind of stumbled into it and then started to really embrace it as an organization.
Great. Thank you, Sovik. And Dave.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, MassMEDIC, for having me along today. My name is Dave Carey. I'm the general manager leading the commercial efforts for a startup in New Hampshire called Pristine Surgical. We are advancing the cause of endoscopy by moving it to single use. And so while that may sound on the surface like it's actually flying in the face of an environmental or a sustainability cause, I hope to give some feedback on our approach to it and how we've actually been able to navigate that. And very excited for this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So let's start with some of the basics. So words matter. We have been sort of throwing around the words like green and sustainability in talking about this. And I'm wondering, how does you or your organization define sustainability? And do you feel that's the right word to capture what we're trying to accomplish? And I'm going to start with you, Lisa, on this topic.
Sure, happy to talk about that. I think the definition is key, and I've spent decades now working in sustainability, and you see the vocabulary change over time and morph over time as those definitions do change, and people are very confused about what is the difference between sustainability and CSR and circular economy and environmental responsibility and social responsibility. And are these related? Are they the same thing? Are they different things? So I think it's a really valid question. I actually like the word sustainability because I think it drives a much more holistic view that is broader and starts to connect up all of those issues around ES and G, which we're seeing now ESG becoming kind of the big terminology as well. Being used right now, which is good because, again, that's a more holistic definition. I define it more around our resiliency and our creation of long-term value for all of our stakeholder communities. And it's very focused on environmental, social, and governance risks and issues and opportunities. So I like to look at it that way, very broadly, very much tied to how ESG issues and opportunities can lead to greater resiliency overall of a company. And that long-term value creation is not just for the company, but is also for employees and our customers and our suppliers and healthcare providers and all of those different organizations and groups, that whole broader ecosystem beyond just the investment community.
That is a large umbrella that covers a lot of things. And even just even just looking at supply chain is complex enough. But I really do think it does cover all of these broader issues, and they all need to be taken into consideration. Dave, what's your perspective?
It's interesting. So I'm now within a company that has less than 20 employees. And so, there's a lot of hats being worn by a lot of different people. And for us, sustainability it's not a department. For us, it's part of our process. And so in the startup world, and I should step back. I did a lot of my growing up at Medtronic. I see Marie O'Malley on here, and I know spending time with Marie and others at the Medtronic organization talking about process and what your business habits are. And so for startups, we don't have that ability and flexibility. It's all about time and money for us. I think that it's really for us about making sure that sustainability and that from our environmental impact, our opportunity impact is tied to our processes in our product development and our people development. And that's the best shot that you have at it. If you put it in your process, then it has a likelier effect on your overall culture and how you approach your business. And we've been able to do that. And I've been part of larger organizations than this, where there is someone from sustainability on core teams to make sure that all of the product development process has influence from sustainability, and it's just not the program du jour. But it does take a different meaning, Stephanie, and a different tack when you're working with a small company and trying to maximize your resources.
Absolutely. So Vic, how do you define the term?
Yeah, so in terms of our understanding of sustainability, we really do try to focus it to mean like what is the ultimate impact that we're having on the environment, on waste creation, on resource utilization. And I think one of the challenges with sustainability is how deep does the rabbit hole really go, right? You could think about it as what resources are people consuming when they're literally unwrapping and using our product, but then it also relates to material choices, right? Like the impact of PVC versus silicone in the production of your product. And then if you take it even a step further from that, like if we are allowing users to be healthier and avoid antibiotics use, that's a whole nother tack on effect of environmental impact, particularly because the negative repercussions of antibiotics are pretty well documented. And I think for us, what we're trying to do is understand what are some of the hidden costs behind product development and product manufacture. Because my personal background's in industrial design. The program that I went to for my MFA was really concerned about sustainability, especially because of design's impact on just creating products. And the big example is cell phones, right? People want to replace their cell phones every year or two, but cell phones generate 200 and more times their weight in waste when they're being produced. So as a designer who's starting a company, that's something that we are incredibly aware of, and we want to get that right. We want to make sure that the cost of producing the product is outweighed by the positive environmental impact of encouraging reuse and reduction in plastic use. As far as the word sustainability being the right word, I think it definitely is. I think it also needs to be considered in context, right? And what I mean by that is sustainability by itself is definitely a goal, right, for a lot of organizations going forward. But you can't just think of sustainability in isolation from other considerations. Again, as a designer, my bias is to think about the user at the end of everything. And so empathy is one of those things where, what we're trying to do is kind of pursue an empathic sort of sustainability where we really imagine what is the end user going through? What do they have to do in order to be able to use our product appropriately to be able to reduce their environmental impact? How can we enable that person to do that, right? How much work are we putting on their plate to reduce their environmental impact? And, you know, for us, it's really important to think through, like, what are the human factors of using our device in order to actually bring that sustainable vision to fruition.
Yeah, I really like all of your definitions, and how I love bringing empathy and into the concept of empathy into this discussion. It's sort of empathy for impact, whether it's the planet or people or, you know, all of the implications of that, I think makes it a very rich, gives it a very rich point of view. Lisa, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love what you said there, Suvik. And I think also that empathy that drives our thinking around the products and the life cycle of our products that you're talking about is really important. And when I'm talking with a lot of folks internally, because we're similar, our function's very small, but we embed sustainability into the work and the decisions people are making and the processes, right? But we always talk about how we care about how our products are made, right? We care about what they're made with. We care about how many natural resources we're pulling from our planet to make them, and how do we become more regenerative and restorative, more circular in our thinking around that product life cycle. We think about who is making those products, how those workers are treated, how our customers are using those products, what outcomes and impacts we're driving with our customers, but also in the communities where we operate and the communities that we serve. And then what happens to those products when our customers are done using them, and, you know, that waste issue, and how do you become more circular, and how do you keep your products in use longer, and those types of concepts. And so we're building in a lot of those, you know, design principles into the way we think about and build it into our innovation about the products. And I think a lot of it is driven by our care of people, our care of planet, and what happens to those natural resources.
If I could jump in, Stephanie, I really like what I'm hearing with all of this. And one of the notes that I had for myself in going into this conversation was that I think you need to look at the entire ecosystem of what you're trying to work within and fix. And so when and this has been something we spent a lot of time on early on in the company, because we're creating a single-use device, and people will say to us, well, you're adding to landfills. And if you look at it as just that device, then that's a statement of truth. But the fact is that when you look at the cleaning and all the things that happen for the current way that business is being done, our landfill exposure for our customers is going to be considerably less than all the cleaning supplies, 400 gallons of water, and everything else that they've got to do. So there's some explaining in that, certainly. But once you do have that conversation and you talk about the fact that, especially in the operating room now, there are a lot of opportunities to recycle medical instruments, and we're going to be part of that infrastructure. So we actually have the opportunity to be completely green while being a single-use device at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a propensity when it comes to this for companies to start with just looking at the widget. And we did that too. We started with our packaging, we reduced that, which was great. But you really need to look at the entire ecosystem that you're looking to influence, because there's a lot of opportunities that go way beyond the product and the package for you to have an impact for your customers.
And also, you know, we're all, sorry to interject, but like we're all working in healthcare, right? And fundamentally, the health of the user it has to be the utmost priority for us, right? And so that becomes a huge part of the sustainability conversation. Like you can't cut corners in the name of sustainability that ultimately leave the user or the patient at risk. And, you know, for us, because it's like catheters being reused within the same person, it's a different type of risk profile than, you know,
sure,
endoscopes that are used among different people, right?
Right.
Excellent.
Right.
I would go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, you know, there's absolutely, I think those points are very valid, and the customer comes first and what their needs are, but also in the manufacture of those products and using more renewable energy are ways, reducing our waste. All of those are other ways to kind of get at sustainability as well. And then there's other issues in the healthcare area around affordability and accessibility, and then with our own employee workforce with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, when you talk about definition, it covers quite a bit of territory when you're looking at it holistically.
I think it's really interesting. I like the line of thinking about really prioritizing human health, right? And if you think about that in the broadest possible terms or in a longer time frame than immediate, human health is inextricably linked to the health of the planet, right? Like, it's pretty direct link. And so that the two of them combined, along with the sort of social responsibility, if you really take a broad definition of what it means to be healthy, right? That really sort of opens up maybe people's perspective on how to think about this topic. You all mentioned some different sort of metrics and how you measure. So I'm wondering if you could share, and you all have a pretty clear definition of what you're talking about. Could you share with the audience any advice on having a shared definition within your organization and shared understanding of metrics and the importance of that? Any advice you could give to our audience as you lessons learned as you've sort of made your way through this process? I'll just leave it open to whoever wants to start talking.
I'm happy to jump in. So I've worked in all different size companies, and I've worked for really big brands that are up there setting huge public targets and goals, as well as smaller companies. And my advice would be start somewhere and don't worry about having the biggest, baddest, best goal out there. Just start and get your baseline data. So understand the basics, understand your energy, / emissions, understand your waste, your water, understand if you do any take back or product stewardship, how much you're putting out on the market, how much you're taking back, how much you might be recycling if you are doing that. And those are kind of some of the key environmental metrics. In the social space and supply chain, there's many other metrics around social responsibility and the monitoring of your supply base. There's product safety, community involvement, and your philanthropic efforts that you can measure, which could be much easier. There's health and safety metrics. It's very broad, just like sustainability definition. There's many metrics. Go after the ones that you already have data on, and then start with something small, start with baselining. And from there, start to see over time what your trends are looking like, and then you can eventually move towards targets and goals.
I'll start on the startup front. So we don't begin with metrics in mind, and I really like Lisa's comments about you've just got to start. I mentioned it earlier, but I've always been raised that business processes are like your habits in your personal life. And if you don't have good habits, inevitably you're going to start running into some self-induced challenges in your life. And the same is true for businesses. And so get some of these metrics, make it part of the way that you go about your business. Don't just make it something that you think about quarterly or have a meeting on once a year. That's all good, but if you want it to be part of your culture, look at your processes to make sure that you're having those conversations, especially in organizations that can't afford to have really talented people focused on this item. For us, and we were a Zoom culture before Zoom was cool, and it was wonderful for us until it became very crowded. But for us, it allowed us the opportunity to get top tier talent and not make them relocate. And so we had this community of virtual people that were all able to communicate with one another without having to travel to go see each other, spending time and energy And it really made a difference for us. And it started us on this role of looking at other areas where we could make a difference. I would encourage people that are on the operative room side, and we're looking at some of these technologies in my startup, but there's companies like Avail, SurgeTime, Proximy, and they're all doing wonderful work of helping people be in different places. I'll give you an example. I observed a surgery in Southern California a couple of months ago, and it was wonderful. I was right there. I was able to have a conversation with the surgeon, the staff, and 2 hours later, I signed off from my living room. And I thought to myself, gosh, 5 years ago, that would have been a 3-day trip from New Hampshire to Southern California, and at least 3 or 4 flights, lots of hotels, rental cars. I did all of that in 2 hours. And so for a startup where time and money is everything, was it as good as physically being there? No. Was it 80% as good as being there? Probably. So if I could accommodate that in 2 hours instead of 3 days, I am getting more of my own time back to be able to contribute different ways to the organization, all the while doing the right thing for the environment, which is, so they're not exclusive events. And I think our mindset here is not as much about goals, but to just be opportunistic, to find these types of technologies. And as I said before, the widget and the packaging are important, but you got to get beyond that to look at your business practices and your policies, and that will allow you to make it a permanent part of your culture.
Excellent. So Vic.
Yeah, and to echo what Dave just said, this is a really difficult sort of thing for anyone to wrap their heads around. I think on a more personal note, like my partner and I, we've been kind of thinking about should we get are reusable plastic bags better for grocery shopping versus paper bags? And there's every article out there says something different, just because it depends on how long you use the bags and all that stuff. And so it is really difficult. And this is a wicked problem in every respect of what a wicked problem is. And frankly, the tools, we're at a very early stage in the process of thinking through sustainability across industries. And there aren't that many tools that I've personally come across that help you to really quantify what it means to be sustainable. And so I think, similar to what Dave and Lisa were saying, the first step is really that shift in mindset, right? To go from thinking about sustainability as an afterthought to thinking about how do we as an organization kind of reflect sustainability as an organization, right? How does it integrate into our organizational goals or our goals of product development? And, for us, we are, like I said, a very early stage organization. And so we're in the process of firming up and documenting our design requirements. And part of that is going to involve looking at packaging and looking at metrics for us, it is a bit focused on the widget because that's where we are in our stage of development. But we are going to be looking at how much waste is there in the packaging? What kind of materials are we using? And can we assess whether or not one material choice versus another is more or less impactful on the environment? And I think a big part of that is also finding developmental partners that are like-minded, who can assist us in making our products sustainable, who share the same values as far as sustainability goes.
So what I'm hearing you all say is that, it can be overwhelming and it could feel like you don't even know where to begin. But what I'm hearing is definitely having some shared language in your organization is important. Start small, start where you're at, and then really get a baseline of what your current footprint is, if I think I'm hearing you right, Lisa, so that you can use and then track those over time to help you sort of identify trends, and then you can start to really develop targets and goals. This is such an interesting conversation. To the audience, if you have any questions, please start throwing them into the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. I would like to know a little bit from you all. I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't trained in this. I didn't take any classes in this. Not a lot of people have, although more and more are emerging. What kinds of skills or teams, I love the idea of building it into your process, but do you feel there are any unique skill sets or people or roles that would be beneficial for the audience to consider?
Sure,
Lisa.
I'm happy to start. I think that I've hired many people over the years, and I am not officially trained in this either because it didn't exist when I was in college. And it is wonderful now to hire college students who are more trained in these spaces. But one of the key skill sets I look for is really strong program management. And the reason is because you're constantly learning. There's constantly new technologies, emerging issues, and you're figuring out solutions to those. And much of the work you're doing is project-based. So yes, you're creating a strategy, your overall strategy, but you generally, I think Dave was talking about process and policy. And a lot of that means you need program management skills. You need to be able to, even if you're setting targets and goals, be able to manage to those via a series of projects and programs to carry out your strategies and to carry through on your goals. So program management skills absolutely are key. And then I like to formulate my team with a variety of skill sets that for the product innovation side, sustainable products, I like to have people who have an engineering degree or engineering background, in addition to some program management capabilities. I like to have people with a business background and business acumen as part of the team, because you have to build the business case for some of these changes. You have to be thinking about what is the ROI to move forward on some of these things, and what does that total cost potentially look like to do some of those things and to make some decisions. I really like sustainability expertise as well in general. I really like supply chain expertise, because a driver and much of the work does touch and connect supply chain, whether you're talking about your facilities and your operations, whether you're talking about your products, whether you're talking about your suppliers. A lot of it connects back into supply chain. And then for those folks who are, if you're going to go deep in environmental, sometimes a little bit more of a science background can be really helpful. And then some perception of regulatory, just because a lot of times from the product and packaging side and movement of material and substances in products, you need a little bit of regulatory. But folks that are intellectually curious, ready to look at emerging issues and pivot to things right away, and those core program management skills are key for me.
So Vic, what's your point of view on the role of design?
I mean, I think that, design is definitely a relevant stakeholder, I think, in the sustainability conversation, partially because I think designers tend to be really good at synthesizing information from various perspectives. And so, to echo what Lisa said, I think it is really important to have a multidisciplinary team and skill set to bear on issues of sustainability. I think for us, because sustainability is frankly still pretty early on in terms of standards and what sustainability even means, a lot of the definition of what sustainability is within the context of a specific organization depends on kind of creating that definition contextually for that organization. So that can mean looking up research papers and just trying to draw conclusions where you can about various impacts on the sustainability of a product across its life cycle. And I think that, designers are, not to be biased, but I think designers are trained to take those different sorts of diverse inputs and to try to synthesize them in a way that is digestible to various stakeholders. But, to kind of broaden that a little bit outside of the field of design specifically, I think someone who is, or people who are good at, self-directed research, right? And good at taking a ton of different inputs and synthesizing them into a conclusion that's informed by the data that's out there, because it's never going to come from a unified source, is incredibly important.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Dave.
Stephanie, if I could step in on something really quickly, I like something that Sovik said earlier when he mentioned that, you know, your contract manufacturers in our world, in the startup world, it really is about who you choose to surround yourself with. We have some unbelievable manufacturers that are helping us get to our market release, and one of them helped us engineer a solution to reduce our packaging by over 25%. And so that cascaded savings throughout the organization was the right thing to do. Our customers won't have to have as much space to store our product, and it costs less to ship. So we had these wins come all the way down the line, but it was really, as a startup, surrounding ourselves with like-minded contract manufacturers to help us, you know, work out those solutions.
Yeah, that you guys are providing some really great perspective and advice. So I think what I heard you all say in sort of summary is multidisciplinary teams, system thinkers, consider the whole experience from all of it. Who you surround yourself with, Dave, I think was just put so well, is share, you know, making sure that the people you're surrounding yourself with have the sort of same shared goals and motivations. And really looking at people who can synthesize complex information into, you know, a solution, because that's what it's going to take, right? This is not linear, it's multifaceted, multidimensional. And looking for people who are really especially skilled at that, such as, for example, just bringing in the designers into this process, which may not be top of mind for a lot of people. I am not seeing any questions in the chat, but we do have about 2 minutes left. If anybody wants to turn their video on and ask a question, that would be great. As we wait to see if somebody jumps on, we'll just give it a moment, see if there's any questions.
If not, I have one, but I'll wait for the audience in case anybody chimes in, but I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, since no one's jumping in. So my question then, to follow on with what you guys were just saying, is how soon can this become a sales and marketing opportunity, right? So more and more we're seeing in the headlines that this can be a product differentiator, right? So how early are you getting the folks from sales and marketing involved in this conversation to understand not just how you're doing good and what you're doing, but how do you showcase that in the best possible way?
Yeah, I'll jump first on that, Rachel. I think that we're seeing customers start to ask it of us. And so recently there was just the top 25 environmentally friendly hospitals were announced. Boston Medical Center was one of them, UVM up north. I think it was NYU, Sloan Kettering. So there is a consideration for environmentally friendly technology and sustainable technology to get preferential treatment in hospital supply chains today. The VA is driving the same type of program. So that's already happening. And I think the more pressure that the industry gets from that, gives us from that, I think is a good thing. And I think that'll drive us to continue to evolve and be able to tell our environmental or our sustainability story.
And
Yeah.
if I can add to that too, I think I look at it slightly differently. I don't necessarily look at it as a marketing play, but I think it's really important for transparency and disclosure of what you're doing. And so we just published our sustainability report for the year 2020 at the end of April. And in there, we aligned to GRI and SASB approach for reporting. And I think that's a way to really show the external world and that larger ecosystem, stakeholder community, what you're focused on, why, what the important issues are, whatever data metrics you have collected, and it tells people a lot more about your company.
And just to round out the responses, I think for us, similar to Dave, like we've actually been really pleasantly surprised by how many end users, like people who use catheters, expressed how uncomfortable they are with the amount of waste that they generate for something that's as essential to the human experience as going to the bathroom and urinating. And so, I think we know from day one that even though we're, pre-FDA approval right now, like that is going to be a really important part of our messaging and storytelling to end users.
That's great. Thank you all. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Anthony, for those of you who aren't following the chat, Anthony suggested that if anyone have any questions on USICA or otherwise, go ahead and shoot him an email. I included his email in there. I really want to thank MassMEDIC for the opportunity to talk about this, and really thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your experience, your advice, and your expertise as we all sort of try to find our way through this complexity. I think one of the keys to our collective overall success is collaboration, communication, and working with each other across industries and across companies. So thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you all so much for this, Dave, Sophie, Lisa, Steph. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We will be sending out the recording of this program, so please feel free to distribute it internally. I know a lot of your teams would also get a lot of value from this. So otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.